This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is a legendary MIT-based expert on profits, pricing, and strategy. His name is Jonathan Byrnes. Decades at MIT, has seen a lot in the Boston area. Today we discuss a topic near and dear to me, should be near and dear to you if you have anything to do with business. Choose your customer, which happens to be the name of his new book. Because I got to tell you, if we're going to compete against the likes of the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples, we don't have time to be everything to everyone. We have to find our people. We have to choose our people. We want to be on the same page. We want to have like-minded people that really want us and what we are giving them. It's about finding the most profitable customers and focusing on them. Give them what they want. You got to give them something the big tech giants can't give. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right into my guest today, Jonathan Byrnes, and talk about choosing your customer. As a fellow entrepreneur, and I have been since I put my first website up in 1996, I really love the direction. And look, there's all kinds of ways we could go in your world, in your career, but your current direction where you're talking about customers and specifically businesses choosing their customers. I started prepping for you today and I was like, or even before today, and I was like, wow, this is my world. I'm not going to say the most important thing, but frankly, it is. The people that I choose to work with, the people that I work with best, the people that get the most value from me, the people that I can do the best economically from, the most win-win situation. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. It really has a deeper aspect as well. The deeper aspect is that we're transitioning from one era of business globally into another. Back when I was a puppy, went to business school in the 1970s, we were in the era of mass markets, where starting around 1900 or so, transcontinental railroads, roads got paved. There are a variety of things that brought local markets together, and the national markets formed. In that era, the one imperative was to be big. In that era, all customers were good because you wanted as much revenue as possible. There were economies of scale, which means that the more you sell, the lower your unit cost. The lower your unit cost, the lower your price. The lower your price, the more you sell. And that was basically the dynamic for most of the past century that drove the rise of the giants, General Mills, General Motors, General Electric, and all the rest of them. What happened starting around 1980, 1990, and 2000, which is what you're talking about, is that with the rise of the internet, markets began to fragment. Amazon, for example, which I'm sure we both remember, came in as a very, very, very marginal minor player, actually went after the customers that nobody else wanted. If I were a big company, I were one of the generals, I had a set of customers that were super big and super high profit. And I said, yeah, they're my profit peaks. And of course, I want to embrace them. And then I had some hidden customers that were really big and unprofitable, but I didn't have the accounting capability to figure out who they were. Then there were just a big tail of small customers that were very marginal. And Amazon went after that small customer segment that nobody knew what to do with, really made it hum.
You're talking initially books.
Initially books, but now everything. What's interesting about Amazon, you feel like they're taking over the world, but in fact, they do one thing and one thing only, and they do it unbelievably well with continuous improvement. And that's arm's length services, information rich to small customers like you and me. You don't see them on a factory floor. You don't see them in hospitals. It's basically the tale of small customers that nobody knew what to do with. As Amazon moves into the low end globally, incumbent customers really have to move into the higher end, the higher service end. There, the market is fragmented because people want different packages of services and products. The market is fragmenting. And I think that the underlying moral of the story is that if you don't choose your customers and you still try to be everything to everyone, and all revenues are good, then you're going to get killed by the niche players who have more focused strategies.
Let's stay at Amazon for a moment, and I want to pick your mind about perhaps issues that I'm not thinking of or issues that we should be thinking about with Amazon. Of course, on the positive side, it's really convenient. You can get anything. I don't use it that much. I'm not in the States at the moment, but even when I was in the States, I don't use it that much. I use it for some things. I still use it primarily for books, and I'll buy some clothes on there or underwear or something. But speak to what has really happened with Amazon, because there's a lot of businesses out there. I can think of just malls and stuff where the rise of Amazon, it did not come without pain to other established businesses. And I'm sure the average consumer can look around and realize what businesses have either downsized or disappeared because of Amazon. But it's been a really amazing push forward to what Amazon has achieved. How do you assess the Amazon situation right now?
It's very interesting. Amazon took a niche of the market. It's very parallel in a certain sense to what happened around 1900 with the rise of the mass markets. In that era, everything was local. You produced something in your town, you sold it in the general store, and most people didn't go more than a long horse ride away during their whole lives. And then along came a transportation revolution, which integrated the markets, and you had the rise of the mass markets. What's happening now is that with the internet, we have a communications revolution that's doing the same thing in reverse. It's refragmenting the markets and allowing a company like Amazon to accumulate incredibly vast and powerful consumer data and use that for precise targeting. So when you go on Amazon, they say you like this book, you're probably going to like these books. They're probably right. The same way that when you go into the Google search, it gives you the sort of stuff that you are interested in. As part of the algorithm is that it's tailored to you. What's really interesting, as we speak, I'm preparing a big talk for 500 CEOs that are either on hospital boards or hospital CEOs about the future of healthcare. I spoke to a number of my friends around the industry since I've been doing a lot of healthcare work for a long time, in addition to the distribution and retail work I do. But what's really interesting is the rise of telemedicine. And it's not just conversing with your doctor through Zoom. You can put sensors at this point in houses on people with Fitbits and do electrocardiograms. You can do all sorts of things, feed it into sort of a central data warehouse, if you will, staffed by physicians who could be in Saigon, Vietnam, or anywhere else. They don't have to be in your local hospital. They can diagnose you and interact with you and then dispatch you to various hospitals or various clinics and other sorts of things near you, or nationally if you've got a really particular problem. In addition, that's sort of the I know what's going on with you side. But the other side is there's just as much innovation opportunity in the next 5 years in putting medical devices in homes. So if you think about the electronics in a typical home, in our home, it's just my wife and myself, my kids grew up, but we have, I think, 4 or 5 different PCs. We have cable, we have just all sorts of stuff. If you had that quantity of medical devices, you could have ultrasounds, you could have EKGs, you could have virtually anything and be able to diagnose and treat diseases that take up 25 to 50% of hospital capacity right now at virtually a minute fraction of the cost. So for example, I was talking over the weekend with a friend of mine who runs one of the major hospital systems. They can put ultrasounds in homes, and people can break up their kidney stones using the ultrasound on their own, maybe with a visiting nurse. When that used to be a trip into the hospital in an overnight or two, completely revolutionizing the healthcare system. And when I get off this call, I'm going to sit down with the slides that I produced yesterday and go through the revolution that's going on or will go on in healthcare. And it looks an awful lot like retail, like telecommunications.
You brought up the healthcare. Were you connecting that to Amazon? Is Amazon going to be in healthcare ultimately?
Yes, absolutely. Because when you're talking about what I described in the home, the natural nexus is Alexa with video. And in fact, the person who ran healthcare for several years for Amazon is a former student of mine. I think that the domain of the home is not the domain of the hospital. It's the domain of Amazon. It's the domain of Walmart. Walmart sent a delegation to MIT, their top executives, about 3 or 4 years ago to talk about whether they should go into healthcare. It's Walmart, not just sell pharmaceuticals and this and that, but really go into healthcare, the real thing. And we spent the day, and they said essentially that there are 2 reasons that they're really seriously considering it. Number one, it's their biggest cost, avoidable cost. And number 2, it's the biggest competitor for the customer's discretionary dollar. We had a very good day. We went through the whole thing. How do you do it? In the evening, we had dinner over at the Harvard Club, so across the river from MIT, where I teach. At the end of the dinner, I said, of course, you want to keep this confidential, right? And they said, no. Listen to this. We spent $400 billion on our supply chain. If we want to go into healthcare, we will outcompete anyone. How much resources does a typical hospital system have? You look at the cash in Amazon, you look at the cash in Apple, look at the cash in these major players, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars with a market cap in the trillions. So you take Tesla, for example, got a higher market cap than the US car makers put together. Tesla. The world is changing incredibly rapidly, and I do see that I can imagine an Amazon dominating the home, a Walmart dominating the stamp it out, replace a knee, do your prostate, a little bit of pediatrics and a few other things locally where they have stores, setting up a clinic adjacent to it. When you get into the really serious stuff, then you have to go to a tertiary academic provider.
It's an interesting way that you bring this up, that the piles of money ultimately are going to win. And these piles of money that we've seen in the last 10 years have basically said, look, okay, great. We made our money in one way, but now that we have it, we're going to attack every industry that we can.
Well, everything that fits. Remember, Amazon is arm's length services to small customers, and that's all they do. And when we're talking about telemedicine and medicine at home, that's what that is, right?
Look, you're a very smart guy from MIT. That short little phrase, yes, okay, it includes everything, but not but 15 years ago, all the things that could have been imagined under that short phrase, nobody would have imagined that.
Nobody would have imagined that. Start off the presentation saying, and I'll give you a quiz. What happened to Lord and Taylor? What happened to Bradley's? What happened to New York Telephone? What happened to New England Telephone? What happened to Eastern Airlines? What happened to Pan American Airlines? What happened to Look and Life magazine? On and on and on. My message is that the revolution is coming. When the tsunami hits, use a Southeast Asian metaphor, when the tsunami hits, it wipes out everything. If you're not on a high mountain, you drown. 5 years before the tsunami, people are sitting on the shoreline drinking pina coladas, saying, isn't the world great? Nothing can change. Isn't this perfect? The tsunami comes and the world is different. That's what's happening right now in retail and distribution, which is why my theme song is Choose Your Customer. People ask me, how do you compete with Amazon? And my answer is, don't. They're going to run over you. If you've got $100 billion in cash sitting around like Walmart, okay, give it a shot. But otherwise, You've got to go into a part of the market that Amazon is not aiming at. You've got to go into the higher service realm, do things like vendor managed inventory, mass customization. There's a whole range of things you can do, but you've got to start choosing your spots.
Let me keep you at the very basic level of an individual entrepreneur like myself, an author, online businesses, etc. But if you look at it at that basic level, and I was thinking about this before our call, I'm sort of a brand. You're a brand. At an individual level, if you are a brand, if you develop yourself as a brand, that's highly defensible against an Amazon. Now, of course, we want to think about companies getting bigger and bigger than just one particular person. But I love the way that you approach this, but it also makes me realize the choices that I made a long time ago. Okay, they haven't made me $1 billion yet, but I love the idea of being an individual with a defensible brand, which is me.
You certainly can do that. But on the other hand, how are you going to market? Aren't you being distributed through Apple and Amazon?
It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. But what happens when they raise their price? Where are you going to go? If you get big enough, they'll either drive you out of business or buy you. So brand makes a big difference if you're going to wind up being Tesla. But for, Zappos shoes, Amazon tried to buy them. They said no. They set up a competing brand in transportation. They used to call those fighting ships, where they would sit in port and load all the merchandise for virtually nothing until the other guy went out of business, and then buy them for a penny. And that's basically the dynamic. If you get big enough, then you're in a different ballgame where your distributors are going to fight you for who owns this. Just going back to healthcare for a second, the dynamic going on in healthcare is that there's incredible cost pressure, as we can all see, that's coming into the system. Whether it's universal healthcare or the insurance companies, whatever it is, the dollars coming into healthcare are going down, 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 inexorably. What flipped telecommunications was that they were on cost plus regulation, and I actually worked with phone companies on this. We changed it to price regulation, where we said, we'll commit to lower our prices by 3 or 4 or 5% every year forever. If we make money, we make money. If we lose money, we lose money. But you get a lower and lower price. And that's, I think, the argument that people will make in healthcare. You ask yourself, can Amazon live with that? And the answer is yes, because they can drive efficiencies. I mean, that's what they do for a living. Can Walmart do that? Yes. Can Lowell General Hospital up here in Boston do that? No. Eventually, the ones that can will contract or be bought by the ones, or will buy and contract with the ones who can't.
You lay out the ominous scenario of the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Googles, but you've written a book. Essentially, it's to motivate and inspire people like me and other entrepreneurs that don't want to be a part of the Leviathan. I mean, that want to be outside it. I'm assuming somewhat of your motivation here is to tell us that, hey, you don't have to be swallowed up by the beast.
Well, that's right. In studies in industrial organization economics, which studies who makes a profit and who doesn't, the industry configuration is always by far the most profitable, has a relatively small number of players with very different strategies, all making a ton of money. If you've got one giant and everybody else loses, then they get regulated, which is what's going on actually now in the Congress. People are talking about breaking up the Amazon and the other giants. When you take a look at most of the businesses, like retail as an example, or industrial distribution, where I was on the board of a big industrial distributor, the piece of the business that is vulnerable to Amazon may be 30 or 40% of the customers, but it's only 20% of the revenues and probably 5% of the profits. On the other hand, the customers that want to have a more intimate relationship, say where we do what's called vendor managed inventory, where we go in and manage the supply chain within the customer. We basically integrate the companies. You get more or less 20% cost reduction in the customer, 20% cost reduction in the vendor, and a 30 to 40% increase in sales and profits. The higher service packages are defensible against Amazon, but people who spend all their resources trying to hold on to the little tail of their business where Amazon's going to nip away at it are doomed. They need to put their money into the defensible segments and then focus their resources and organize their company to win in those segments because it's a different organization. If you're in the Amazon world, you basically want to have a command and control structure where you figure out your business model and you just drive it, which is what Amazon and the others are doing. When you're in the higher service segments, you want to have a decentralized organization where different multi-capability teams with supply chain and sales and marketing, financing, and IT information get together and focus on individual segments and even individual customers. It's a completely different way to run a business.
One phrase I pulled from your work: are all orders equally profitable to serve? And that's a really challenging way to think. And you've laid it out already. Everybody wants to think as an entrepreneur, as a business person, well, I'll take all that business. But hey, hold on. What kind of time and resources are you spending to get small money or small clients where you otherwise could be focusing on where the business really should be?
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think there are two aspects. Amazon is set up to do nothing but the small clients. So they're highly automated. Everything goes through AI algorithms. I mean, that's what they do. You can make a ton of money if that's all you do and you're unbelievably good at it, which is what Amazon does. On the other hand, the difficulty that these multi-mass market companies that are trying to live in this new world of what I call diverse markets have is that their traditional accounting doesn't help them. In traditional accounting, I'm not going to get at all technical, but the 1 second view is that regular accounting says you pile up revenues here, you pile up costs there. And if revenues are higher than costs, you win, you make a profit. So obviously you want more revenues no matter where they comes from and fewer costs no matter where they pertain to. That's completely wrong because a lot of those revenues, as you say, are losing money. But you can't see that when you can't match the revenue with the cost. So we actually invented a new way to accounting. Traditional accounting tells you whether you're making money, and that's always true, but it doesn't tell you where you're making money. I thought about that issue. It seemed to me that the individual transaction is the atom of the company financially. So I go into Staples and I buy 2 pencils, an eraser, and a ruler. Each of those is a transaction. If I can figure out the actual cost of buying 2 pencils, then I can create a full income statement, profit and loss statement on that transaction. It turns out that that's not terribly hard to do, but it's different from all current types of accounting. We call it transaction-based metrics. And we actually have a software company called Profit Isle that does that. And we've done that on over $100 billion in client revenues. And we get 10 to 30% year-on-year profit increases sustainably because we can tell where the company is making money. Once you get, say, that transaction where I go into Staples and buy 2 pencils, I know the brand, I know the cost of the product, I know the store, I know the sales rep, I know who the customer is, I know how they bought it. If it was electronic, I knew whether I had to deliver it. I knew whether I'm a slow payer and on and on and on. And you can account for almost 95 to 98% of the cost really pretty easily if you know how to do it. And then you put it into a really complex database structure. We're running in the Google Cloud. In some complicated companies, we're doing 10 million transactions a month, which you can do at scale in the cloud. Could never have done that 5 years ago. That'll tell you exactly where you're making money and exactly where you're not. If you've got a certain type of product and a certain type of customer, you can line up which transactions are making money and which aren't and why. Well, these are underpriced. Those are ordered too often. These are sold by a salesperson who doesn't know how to sell, and so on, and feed it back into the company so that you can do 2 things. Number one, you can choose the segment you want to go after And number two, you can absolutely win your segment because you've got all the information to know where you're doing great and where you're not doing so well. You can feed that back into the people who are doing the work so that they can get up to best practice.
Which is ultimately getting at choosing your customer.
And aligning resources.
Let me keep you big picture for a moment. The reason for this direction that you've gone, this perspective, choosing your customer in the context of the big digital tech firms taking over everything, is this driven by a philosophical reason of yours, or is it just driven by the fact that you looked at the situation and you saw quantitatively, well, here's an opportunity and other businesses are not thinking about this? What was driving you to do this work?
I was deeply involved in airline deregulation. I wrote my doctoral thesis at Harvard Business School on airline deregulation and who won and who lost and why. Unbeknownst to me, the telecommunications companies, the telephone companies read it and started calling me. I really had no background in telecom. It's a little bit complicated technically, although I can handle that. They started calling me and asking me to tell them about the airlines. So I went in and they said, well, can you tell us who's going to win and who's going to lose? I did. And I worked with all of the major telecommunications companies over a decade. Basically, I put together New York and New England Telephone into NYNEX. I advised NYNEX and Bell Atlantic that became Verizon, and worked with AT&T, with MCI, if you remember MCI, British Tel. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I wound up seeing that they needed to do a couple of things. They needed to understand the underlying economic forces, which are like tsunamis. You can channel a tsunami, but you can't stop it. So you have to understand, if you strip away things like regulation and the way that things used to be, what are the forces that will drive a certain economic structure? Then you sort of position your company into that, evolving that new structure. I did that with telecom, and out came Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and a few other niche players. Then I did the same thing, doing it now with retail and distribution, where I'm on the board of a big distributor and do a lot of work with retailers. I see the same set of forces with Amazon coming in at the low end and the need to customize and specialize at the higher end. In fact, MSC, the company whose board I sat on for 10 years, has the tagline, it's a big $3 billion distributor. Their tagline is built to make you better. Amazon is not built to make you better, it's built to make you cheaper. And they do a great job, built to make things more accessible. But MSC will go in and work with their customers to improve their businesses and sell them the products that they need to do it. I saw that emerging. In the meantime, people in the healthcare industry saw what I was doing, started calling me. So I've worked with a number of the major hospital systems, and they want to know what forces are emerging and what the industry structure will be. The theme song of this whole thing is that in the 1900s, it was about get big. Now it's about make a choice. Figure out where you've got a defensible piece of the market with super high profit and super high growth, and then focus your company and all your resources to do that and only that. The things that are adjacent, make sure that your company's organized so that that's what you're doing. That today is the secret to winning. It was with the airlines. It was with telecommunications and Verizon. It is today with Amazon and retail. By the way, Amazon isn't the only winner. Nordstrom is doing very well. Neiman Marcus is doing very well. Target is doing spectacularly well. There's just a host of different players. And you see, on the grocery side, a number of very successful companies. Trader Joe's, for example, they've got a niche. They're doing terrifically. They make a ton of money, but they're not fighting with Amazon. That's what I think generated my interest in writing this book, which is sort of explaining the transition going on, the tsunami that's sweeping through all of the industries, that's powered by the internet. It's powered by communications the same way that in 1900, the integration of paved roads destroyed all the local businesses or made them consolidate into national businesses. Now the internet is deconsolidating all that and saying, you got to make a choice. You got to figure out who you are, and you have to do that and do that really, really well. And that was the motivation.
My question might be topical and current for the moment, but your perspective and your background on this go back decades. Let me pick your mind a little bit more on your perspective of these handful of big tech companies, because they've taken over so much and that they've done so well in such just a small amount of years. Can you imagine a situation in the future where it's too much? Even though you're laying out a scenario very clearly and coherently in your newest work about how the rest of us outside of the handful of big tech companies can do okay. Can you imagine a situation, though, where just as much that we couldn't imagine how big Amazon was going to get within a decade, can you imagine a situation in the future where the rules have to be rewritten again? I mean, can you imagine Amazon getting too big?
I could imagine it, but I don't think it's likely, because I think that Amazon eventually will get into businesses that can be fragmented off. And I think you've got major players like Walmart, to a lesser extent Target, who are coming after Amazon. The same way that you had TV networks that were all powerful, and then along came cable. And I think that that will self-discipline. What I worry more about is Facebook, for example, where they can create profiles of virtually everybody in the world who's on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. Everybody else I know and everybody else that everybody knows is on Facebook. They're creating basically psychological profiles and feeding people what they want to hear. And it's causing immense political disruption without choosing sides. Am I a Democrat? Am I a Republican, et cetera? If you just take a look at the volume of disagreement versus the amount of agreement, say 10, 20 years ago, our political world is completely changing.
There's no middle ground now. It's two polar opposites, huh?
That's right. I think I heard that George W. Bush did an op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of days ago saying on immigration, find a middle ground. But if you get Facebook saying you kind of don't like this, let me give you the billion reasons why it's so terrible. And say to somebody else, you don't like that. Let me give you the billion reasons why that's so terrible. They're just sitting around riling everybody up in order to sell advertising. I think that that's more where you're going to find the regulation and not Amazon. It's interesting because I wrote a blog post on this and I got a call from the number 2 person in Amazon who's a former student saying, is that true? I think with Amazon, you're going to get diseconomies of scale eventually because you can only go into so many side businesses. They're going into groceries, they're going into this and that, they're buying former retail stores and shopping centers and turning them into warehouses. They're starting their own third-party carrier. And at some point, the thing's going to sort of fall apart of its own lack of cohesion. They don't need outside regulation. I think, the market forces will pull them back to their core. Facebook's a different animal.
You said you're not on Facebook.
I'm not on social media.
I was going to ask you what your reasons are, but I don't think I need to after you just gave that explanation.
Well, the reason is that as a public figure, if I got on LinkedIn or Facebook or any of those, I get flooded. So I have to be careful about what relationships I choose to spend time on.
Yeah, no, understandable. I've seen the pros and cons to it.
And I would add that, I go way back when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in Kirkland House. One of my former students had the room across the hall from him. They drilled holes in the wall. Don't tell Harvard, but they drilled holes in the wall so that they could play video games together. My son Steve was good friends with one of the roommates because Steve was a physicist at Harvard as an undergrad. These kids were computer people, so they had a lot of the same courses. And I think my son's Facebook number is about number 40 or number 45. So he was in the first circle of friends. I remember at that time, I was vice president of the Harvard Alumni Association. And we had an award that we gave to people who innovated to improve undergraduate life at Harvard. We had a big debate about Mark Zuckerberg because he had gotten into trouble before Facebook. He had a thing called Face Mash, which was sort of a, what woman do you think is ugliest? So he got into a lot of trouble with the ad board, they call it the administrative board. And we said, no, nonetheless, this Facebook looks like a decent thing. Let's give him the award. So we wound up giving him the award, and I actually presented it to him.
If you stay in Boston for 30 plus years at MIT and Harvard, you kind of, in the last at least 30 years, you've really been around some interesting names, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the nicest part of it is that through the privilege of teaching and writing, I hope that I've made people's lives better.
One of the phrases that you use in your writing, which I really love, is just simple. One of those things you almost would have put like a Post-it note or a sticky up on your desktop, which is be the best at something. It's so simple, but it's like so, if people could really understand what that means. Look, if you were a 22-year-old kid right now, and you just trusted that Jonathan is right about that, be the best at something, and you said, okay, I'm 22, I'm going to change my life, I'm just going to focus on being the best at something, I can almost guarantee, me and my power here in Saigon, I can almost guarantee they would have a great life.
Absolutely. And be best at what you love. And I tell that to my students in the last lecture every year. Call it the $20 million test. If somebody gave you, as I say to the class, they're graduate students getting masters or PhDs, and I say, somebody gave you $20 million after you spent a month at the beach and you got bored because having gotten to MIT, you're probably going to get bored. What would you do if you didn't have to do anything? Whatever that is, that's what you should do, because you'll be happier. If you're happy, you will work better, you'll be into it, and you probably make more money. And even if you don't, when you get to my stage of life, I'm 72, I can look back and say, it's better to be happy than to be rich. Frankly, if you're reasonably capable, you're going to get enough to do whatever you want anyway. Do you really need that fourth BMW? I think that the definition of leadership that I heard that really resonated with me came from a friend who's director of admissions at Harvard Business School. And she said, a leader is somebody who leaves footprints in his or her area of passion. Most people focus on how to leave footprints. What they forget is that the most important thing is working in your area of passion. You certainly, Mike, have found an area of passion, something that most people probably haven't thought of and may not be capable of doing, but you do it and you do it incredibly well. I'm guessing that if you didn't like it so much, you wouldn't have the drive to make it better and better and better to the point where you've got one of the best shows in the world. I think it probably naturally evolved from you just wanting to do things you really, really like. I know that when I look back at my career, I had some experiments with stuff that didn't really fit me all that well. I still did them okay, but it wasn't really my cup of tea. And then I found my cup of tea and kind of stuck with it. In business and in a lot of things, there are three things that are important. One is that it's all about the customer value. You are the value that you create. Try to create different kinds of value for everybody all over the map, being all things to all people, or you try to create one type of value for people where it doesn't fit. It's not going to work. I think the second thing is that the essence of strategy is what you say no to.
I love that one. That one's so good. Elaborate on that. It's so good.
Yeah, if you look at most corporate strategies, they want to do well for their stakeholders, make money, have their employees love them, have the customers love them. People say, how do you win at customer centricity? I guess that's the buzzword. The way you do it is you figure out who you are and you find people who fit you or whom you fit. When you have that match, then you can create more and more and more value. That's what Amazon did. That was the brilliance of Jeff Bezos. He really saw that the internet allowed him to do new things, and he stuck with his knitting. If you think about the great entrepreneurs in the world, you think about Bill Gates and Microsoft, whether you're a Microsoft fan or not, he sat in a dorm room and career house at Harvard. I was at Harvard at the time as a graduate student. And he said, I think the story is that Paul Allen came trotting across Harvard Yard with a Popular Electronics or whatever it is, and said, there are these crazy things called PCs coming up. I think it was the Altair or something at that time. Gates said, my goodness, we should have one of these on every desk. Then that was his life. Didn't do anything else. But he was smart enough to form the relationships with IBM and others that even with a lousy product, even with a mediocre product, he formed the relationship that put him at the center of the industry, and then he improved his product. And it was the same thing with the operating systems. He got the deal with IBM to do the operating system, and he didn't have one that worked. So he went to a little company in Seattle called, I think it was called Seattle Products or something. They had an operating system that he bought for $50,000. It was,
by the way, the best book on that with a $50,000 story is a book called Hard Drive.
Yeah, it's also in a very good book. There were a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened. Gary Kendall actually had a better system, and he decided that he'd blow off the meeting. Then he had to rewrite it from scratch. It was QDOS, which they call it was Quick and Dirty Operating System. Changed it to DOS, Disk Operating System. But anyway, what made Gates wonderful, and Steve Jobs, and Fred Smith, who did Federal Express, and Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Sam Walton, on and on and on. The ones that win, a razor sharp, pinpointed sense of what they needed to be best at, and they said no to everything that didn't fit. They stuck to their knitting like glue. They just drove innovation in their place of focus. That was the secret to their success. The last point is be best. Create value, say no to things that don't fit, and be best at what you do. That means choose your customer, focus your resources, and structure your company to be able to do that. If Amazon is vacuuming up the small customers, don't spend the rest of your life trying to put your finger in the dike. Go after the customers that you can create value for in other sorts of ways. I was thinking this morning, where do you buy clothes? Well, you can go to Brooks Brothers, you can go to Target, you can go to Walmart, you can go to LL Bean, where I shop, Orvis, there's all sorts of places. But the ones that succeed are the ones that know who they are.
Jonathan, as we wind down here, I've only got you for so much time. I've got one last thought. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but here you are in this catbird seat as a professor teaching at MIT 30 plus years. So most of the kids in your classroom are going to be some of the highest scoring kids when they come into MIT and whatnot. I mean, just really smart individuals. Is there anything you can pass along to us, that those of us that have either not been to MIT, I'm sure I have plenty of people listening that have attended MIT, but is there something you can pass along being in that situation to teach to all those smart kids over this interesting 30-year stretch? What's the difference that you can notice about your students? Is there any difference over that 30-year stretch? What do you see? What can you enlighten us about?
I think that there are two things, particularly as I look at 30 years of former students who are now running major companies and all sorts of things. The ones that did what they really wanted to do are the happiest ones. And I can't tell you how many people and students I know, because I was also president of the Harvard Alumni Association. We have 350,000 Harvard alumni around the world who are extremely capable, really kind of unhappy people. And I think the most important thing is do what you really want to do. The other thing that I think really, really struck me is that as other schools are doing, at MIT, we have an outreach program where we give courses online around the world. And my department at MIT, right now we have 500,000 people taking our courses around the world. We did an experiment a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, where we said, okay, we'll give you a certificate, but if you do really well in the courses, we're going to pick out 30 students from around the world or, wherever, and offer them and say, this is the equivalent of one semester at MIT. Come to MIT and be resident for another semester, and we'll give you a master's degree. About 20 out of the 30 students in my class. Physically, I teach a case course, and I have about 60 students. I had about 20, they call it the blended program, and the rest were from our residential programs and around MIT. These were people who would not have had even a prayer of coming near a place like MIT. Sometimes they were from poor areas, sometimes because they never were exposed to it, sometimes because they were busy and successful. It was just a complete hodgepodge. Sure enough, they did as well as, if not better, than our admitted resident students. And now we're permanently taking half of our class blended and half of our class resident. And I think that was a really big aha. How many people out there have the potential to do incredible things, and either they never do them because they seem out of reach, or they don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the ability to access a place like MIT, or they don't have the background. You just think about the range of underutilized people, it's mind-boggling.
One last little follow-up there. You mentioned people that perhaps have gone to some of the best universities, best colleges. They don't choose happiness, so they end up being unhappy. Can I make the simple conclusion that their unhappiness often comes from, wow, I'm going to take this job at this big company and they're going to pay me this big money, and then I'm going to do something for decades that I hate? It's ultimately that simple.
I think for a lot of people, that's true. I remember I went to my high school, I think it was the 40th reunion. I grew up in Connecticut. And so I went back to Hartford, where I'm from, for our 40th reunion. I was past president of the Harvard Alumni Association. I know when I go to Harvard alumni events, I always just sit down at any random table because everybody's interesting and it's kind of fun and you meet people. So I did that at my high school reunion. I could have sat with people that I've known since I was a baby, but instead I just sat down with a bunch of people I didn't know to get to know them. Everybody at the table said essentially the same thing. I just spent 30 years in the insurance company, and now I'm finally going to do what I really want. I'm going to move to Hawaii and work in a zoo. Somebody else, I was a teacher and, I hated it and blah, blah, blah. After about an hour, I just thought, get me out of here.
I would go crazy myself. Look, I didn't tell you at the beginning, the reason I'm in Saigon, I was happily living in San Diego, and somebody said, hey, Mike, come do a speaking tour for 3 or 4 months in Asia. I did that. I traveled all around Asia, and I said, okay, I'm not leaving Asia. I said to myself, where'd I have the most fun? Saigon. I had the wherewithal. I had the means. I said, okay, I'm making the choice. I'm staying here.
That's right. I think that's the lesson, You can do whatever you want. You have to do it.
Cool stuff. Hey, we didn't talk as detailed as we possibly could, but I really love the path that you're laying down. The book, Choose Your Customer, How to Compete Against the Digital Giants and Thrive. To my heart, that's something I want to hear, because it's like, how do you compete? How do you do it? How can you thrive? And I think, we've talked about some of the big picture issues today, but finding something you can be the best at, boy, that just resonates. It always resonates. Just tack it up on the wall.
Exactly. And I think you're a wonderful role model for everybody listening in. It really is a privilege to get to spend some time and get to know you better. I hope we can stay in touch.
Absolutely. In fact, when COVID's over one day, I'll make my way to Fenway. And if you let me buy you into Fenway, we'll share a game.
That's great. I was there recently. That's where I got my COVID shot.
Well, listen, hey, take care, Jonathan. Thank you for coming on again. Hey, is there a website you want to direct people to? People can find you at MIT and all that. Is there anywhere you want to direct people to?
Yeah, I'd say go to www.profitisle.com. That's our software company. And the book website is www.chooseyourcustomer.com.
Jonathan, thank you for taking some time today. I appreciate it.
Okay, take good care, Mike.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.